In a small, sleepy town nestled between rolling hills and sprawling farmlands, life moved at a predictable pace. The streets were lined with modest houses, their porches adorned with flower pots and rocking chairs. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and nothing much ever happened, at least not until one fateful evening when everything changed forever. Michael Carter lived in this town, a man as ordinary as they come but well-liked by all who knew him. He worked as a mechanic at a local garage, fixing cars with precision and care. People trusted him because he was honest and hard-working. Michael had never been in trouble with the law, nor did he have any enemies. His days followed a simple routine: wake up early, go to work, return home, and spend time with his family. It was an unremarkable yet fulfilling existence. What made Michael stand out even more was his humility. Unlike some people who craved attention or status, Michael preferred staying under the radar. He didn't talk much about his personal life, especially not about his older brother, James Carter. James wasn't just anyone. He was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, one of the most powerful positions in the country. But Michael kept this fact private. To his neighbors and co-workers, he was simply Mike, the friendly mechanic down the street. On that particular evening, Michael finished his shift at the garage later than usual. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the roads. As he drove home in his old sedan, listening to soft music on the radio, he noticed flashing blue and red lights behind him. At first, Michael felt no alarm. Traffic stops were common in the area, and he hadn't done anything wrong. Perhaps he'd accidentally gone over the speed limit or missed a stop sign. Whatever it was, he figured it would be a quick exchange, a warning, maybe a ticket, and then he could continue on his way. Pulling over to the side of the road, Michael turned off the engine and waited patiently. Two police officers approached, his car, their flashlights illuminating the interior. One of them tapped on the window, signaling for Michael to roll it down. When he did, the officer asked brusquely, "Do you know why we pulled you over?" Michael shook his head, replying politely, "No, sir. I'm not sure what I did wrong." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner before saying, "You match the description of a suspect involved in a robbery earlier today." At first, Michael thought it was a joke. Robbery? Him? That couldn't be right. He had spent the entire day at the garage, surrounded by colleagues and customers. Surely there must be some misunderstanding. Calmly, he explained himself, offering details about his whereabouts. But instead of listening, the officers grew increasingly hostile. Their tone shifted from questioning to accusatory, laced with racial undertones. "Don't play dumb with us," one of them snapped. "We've got reports and your story doesn't add up." Michael froze. He wasn't naive. He understood racism existed, but he never imagined it would happen to him in such a direct and aggressive manner. Still, he tried to remain composed, hoping reason would prevail. "I'm telling you the truth," he said firmly. "I haven't done anything illegal. Can I please call someone to verify my alibi?" His request fell on deaf ears. Instead, the officers grabbed him roughly, twisting his arms behind his back and slapping handcuffs onto his wrists. "Save it for the station," one of them muttered, coldly. As Michael sat in the back seat of the police car, his mind raced. How could this be happening? Why weren't they believing him? Every attempt to explain himself only seemed to make things worse. The drive to the station felt endless, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on his chest. When they arrived, Michael was led inside, where he was fingerprinted and photographed like a common criminal. Humiliation washed over him as he realized the gravity of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a random traffic stop. It was something far darker and more sinister. Back at the station, the treatment Michael received worsened. The officers refused to let him make a phone call, claiming protocol dictated otherwise. They ignored his pleas for fairness and dismissed his claims of innocence outright. In their eyes, he wasn't a human being deserving of respect. He was just another statistic, another faceless individual caught in their web of bias and prejudice. Hours passed, and Michael grew increasingly frustrated. He knew he needed help, but reaching out seemed impossible under these circumstances. Meanwhile, word of Michael's arrest spread through the town like wildfire. Some residents believed the police version of events without question, assuming guilt based on hearsay alone. Others, however, found it hard to reconcile the image of Michael they knew with the accusations against him. Among those concerned was Michael's wife, Sarah. She tried calling his phone repeatedly, only to hear it ring unanswered. Panic set in as she realized something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, she decided to contact the one person who might be able to intervene, James Carter, her brother-in-law. When James received Sarah's frantic call, his blood ran cold. Hearing the details of Michael's ordeal filled him with rage. No matter how high-ranking his position, seeing his own flesh and blood subjected to such injustice cut deep. Determined to act, James immediately mobilized his resources. As FBI director, he had access to tools and networks that could expose the truth quickly. He dispatched agents to gather evidence, review surveillance footage, and interview witnesses. Within hours, a clearer picture began to emerge, one that painted the police department in a damning light. The investigation revealed shocking truths. Not only was Michael innocent of the alleged crime, but the officers involved had a history of discriminatory behavior. Records showed patterns of racial profiling and misconduct stretching back years. Yet, none of these incidents had ever been properly addressed, allowing the cycle of abuse to continue unchecked. Armed with this information, James prepared to confront the system head-on. He vowed not only to clear Michael's name, but also to hold those responsible accountable for their actions. For Michael, the hours spent locked away in a cell felt like an eternity. Each passing moment chipped away at his dignity, leaving him feeling powerless and betrayed. Little did he know, forces were already in motion to bring justice to his doorstep. The stage was set for a battle that would shake the foundations of the town, and perhaps the nation itself, to its core. As the hours ticked by, Michael sat alone in the cold, dimly lit cell at the police station. The walls were bare, save for a few scratches and scuff marks left behind by previous occupants. A faint buzzing sound came from the fluorescent light above, flickering occasionally as if it too was struggling to stay alive. Michael's mind raced with questions. How could this have happened? Why wouldn't anyone listen to him? He replayed the events of the evening over and over again, trying to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed his life. Outside the station, whispers about Michael's arrest spread like wildfire through the town. Neighbors who once greeted him warmly now looked at each other skeptically. Some believed the police must have had good reason to detain him. After all, officers didn't just arrest people without cause, right? Others weren't so sure. They remembered Michael as the kind mechanic who always offered a smile and went out of his way to help those in need. Could someone like him really be capable of committing a robbery? Sarah, Michael's wife, felt her world crumbling around her. She paced back and forth in their living room, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. Every call she made went unanswered. Every attempt to reach Michael met with silence. Her heart sank deeper with each passing minute. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, she dialed James Carter's number. As the phone rang, she prayed he would pick up. When his calm but authoritative voice answered, Sarah burst into tears, spilling out everything she knew about Michael's arrest. James listened intently, his jaw tightening with every word. By the time Sarah finished speaking, his anger was palpable. Though he rarely showed emotion publicly, this was personal. His younger brother, his family, was being treated as less than human, and James wasn't about to stand idly by while injustice reigned. "Don't worry," he told Sarah firmly. "I'll handle this." With those words, he hung up the phone and sprang into action. The first thing James did was assemble a team of trusted agents. These weren't ordinary investigators. They were seasoned professionals trained to uncover even the smallest details hidden beneath layers of deception. James gave them explicit instructions: leave no stone unturned. They began by reviewing the surveillance footage from nearby businesses along the route where the alleged robbery took place. What they found was startling. The cameras clearly showed Michael driving peacefully toward home at the exact time of the crime, miles away from the scene. There was no doubt. He couldn't have been involved, but the evidence didn't stop there. Witnesses came forward, corroborating Michael's story. Employees at the garage confirmed that he had been working throughout the day, surrounded by colleagues and customers. Even local shopkeepers recalled seeing him earlier, chatting casually as he ran errands. Each piece of information painted a clearer picture. Michael Carter was innocent and the accusations against him were baseless. Meanwhile, inside the police station, things were growing increasingly tense. The officers responsible for Michael's arrest began to realize they might be in trouble. At first, they tried to downplay the situation, confident that their badges would shield them from consequences. After all, hadn't they always gotten away with similar behavior in the past? This arrogance blinded them to the storm brewing outside their doors. It wasn't long before James's investigation reached the ears of the local media. Reporters, eager for a sensational story, descended upon the small town like vultures circling prey. News vans lined the streets, microphones thrust toward residents asking for comments. Headlines blared across newspapers and TV screens. Local man wrongfully arrested. Was it racial profiling? The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice for Michael Carter. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace," and "End police brutality now." Inside the station, panic set in among the officers. For years, they had operated under a veil of impunity, believing themselves untouchable. But now, cracks were beginning to show in their carefully constructed facade. One officer, desperate to deflect blame, tried to pin the arrest on his partner, claiming he had merely followed orders. Another attempted to destroy incriminating documents, shredding papers late into the night. Yet none of their efforts could erase the truth that James's team was steadily uncovering. Back at home, Sarah watched the news unfold with a mix of relief and dread. On one hand, she was grateful that people were finally paying attention to Michael's plight. On the other hand, she feared what might happen next. Would the officers retaliate against Michael once they realized how much scrutiny they were under? Her fears weren't unfounded. Inside the cell, Michael could hear the angry voices of protesters echoing through the station. Though their chants gave him hope, they also heightened his anxiety. He couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. As the investigation progressed, James decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He called a press conference inviting reporters from major outlets to hear the full story. Standing behind a podium adorned with the FBI seal, James addressed the crowd with unwavering resolve. "Today we expose the truth," he declared, his voice steady and commanding. Behind him, a large screen displayed damning evidence. Surveillance, footage showing Michael miles away from the crime scene, witness testimonies confirming his innocence, and internal records revealing a pattern of misconduct within the police department. The room fell silent as James continued. "What happened to my brother is not an isolated incident," he said. "It is part of a larger systemic issue that has plagued our society for far too long. Officers sworn to protect and serve have instead abused their power, targeting individuals based on race rather than facts. This cannot and will not be tolerated." His words struck a chord with everyone present. Cameras flashed as reporters scrambled to capture every detail. Outside, protesters cheered, their voices rising in unison. The message was clear. Justice was overdue, and the people demanded accountability. For the officers involved in Michael's arrest, the press conference marked the beginning of the end. Within hours, warrants were issued for their arrest. Internal Affairs launched a thorough review of the department, uncovering decades of unchecked corruption. Officers implicated in the scandal were suspended pending further investigation, while others resigned in disgrace. The mayor issued a public apology, promising sweeping reforms to restore trust between law enforcement and the community. As the dust settled, Michael remained in custody, unaware of the tidal wave of change sweeping through the town. Yet, even in the darkest moments, he held onto a sliver of hope. Somewhere out there, his brother was fighting for him. And if anyone could bring light to the shadows, it was James Carter. The morning after James Carter's explosive press conference, the small town buzzed with a mix of shock, anger, and anticipation. The evidence presented had left no room for doubt. Michael Carter was innocent, and the police officers who arrested him were guilty of gross misconduct. Yet despite the mounting pressure, the local police department initially resisted cooperating with the investigation. Behind closed doors, panicked discussions unfolded as officers scrambled to protect themselves from the fallout. Inside the station, the atmosphere was tense. Some officers tried to distance themselves from the scandal, claiming they had no knowledge of what their colleagues had done. Others doubled down, insisting that Michael's arrest had been justified and accusing James of using his position to interfere in local matters. But their defiance only fueled public outrage. Protesters outside grew louder, their chants echoing through the building. "Justice for Michael!" they shouted, holding up signs with his picture. The crowd swelled with each passing hour, drawing attention not just locally but nationally. James wasted no time capitalizing on the momentum. He coordinated with federal agencies to ensure the investigation was thorough and transparent. Agents combed through years of records, uncovering a pattern of racial profiling, excessive force, and cover-ups within the department. Each new revelation added fuel to the fire, exposing the rot at the heart of the institution. It became clear that Michael's case wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a systemic problem that had festered unchecked for far too long. Meanwhile, inside the cell, Michael struggled to process everything happening around him. He could hear the protests outside, the voices rising in unison like a tidal wave crashing against the walls of the station. At first, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this meant someone was finally listening. But as hours turned into days, frustration began to creep in. Why hadn't anyone come to release him yet? Wasn't it obvious he was innocent? The uncertainty weighed heavily on him, gnawing at his resolve. Sarah, Michael's wife, was equally torn between relief and despair. She watched the news coverage obsessively, clinging to every update about the investigation. While she was grateful for James's efforts, she couldn't help but worry about her husband's well-being. How much more could he endure? She visited the station daily, demanding answers, but the officers refused to let her see Michael. Their stonewalling only deepened her anger and determination to fight back. As the scandal dominated headlines, national, civil rights organizations stepped in to support Michael's case. Lawyers specializing in police misconduct offered their services pro bono, vowing to hold the department accountable. Social media campaigns gained traction, with hashtags like Free Michael Carter trending across platforms. Celebrities and activists joined the chorus, amplifying the call for justice. The pressure mounted until it became impossible for authorities to ignore. Finally, after 3 agonizing days, the tide began to turn. A judge issued an order for Michael's immediate release, citing overwhelming evidence of his innocence. When the cell door creaked open, Michael blinked in disbelief. For a moment, he thought it might be another cruel twist of fate. But then he saw James standing there, his face etched with both relief and fury. "It's over," James said firmly, pulling his brother into a tight embrace. "You're coming home." Stepping out of the station, Michael was met with a scene, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Hundreds of people had gathered, cheering and clapping as he emerged into the sunlight. Strangers hugged him, tears streaming down their faces. Reporters shoved microphones in his direction, asking how he felt about the ordeal. Overwhelmed, Michael simply raised a hand in gratitude, unable to find words. Sarah rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him as if afraid he might disappear again. Together, they walked away from the station, leaving behind the place that had held him captive for far too long. But while Michael was free, the battle was far from over. James made it clear that accountability was non-negotiable. He worked tirelessly to ensure that those responsible for the wrongful arrest faced consequences. Arrest warrants were issued for the officers involved, and several high-ranking officials resigned under scrutiny. Federal oversight teams took control of the department, implementing sweeping reforms to prevent future abuses of power. Training programs emphasized cultural sensitivity, de-escalation tactics, and ethical conduct. Community advisory boards were established to monitor police activity and provide civilian input. For the officers implicated in the scandal, the repercussions were severe. One by one, they were brought before the courts to answer for their actions. Testimonies from victims of past injustices painted a damning picture of a culture rife with prejudice and impunity. Sentencing hearings drew large crowds, with many attending to witness history being made. Some officers received lengthy prison terms while others were stripped of their badges and banned from law enforcement permanently. The message was clear. No one was above the law, not even those tasked with enforcing it. In the weeks that followed, Michael found himself thrust into the spotlight. Despite his preference for anonymity, he realized his story had become a symbol of resilience and justice. People looked to him as proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, truth and perseverance could prevail. Encouraged by James and Sarah, Michael decided to use his experience to advocate for change. He began speaking at rallies, sharing his story to inspire others to demand accountability and reform. His words resonated deeply, especially among marginalized communities who had long suffered in silence. The town itself underwent a transformation. Conversations about race, privilege, and systemic inequality became commonplace, sparking initiatives aimed at fostering understanding and unity. Schools introduced programs to teach students about civil rights and social justice. Local leaders collaborated with community members to rebuild trust and create safer spaces for dialogue. Slowly but surely, the scars of division began to heal. Yet, for Michael, the journey toward healing was deeply personal. The trauma of his wrongful arrest lingered, manifesting in sleepless nights and moments of anxiety. Therapy sessions became a crucial part of his recovery, helping him process the emotional toll of the ordeal. Through it all, he leaned on his family for strength, particularly James, whose unwavering support had been instrumental in securing his freedom. As time passed, Michael's advocacy work gained momentum. He traveled to other towns and cities, meeting individuals who had endured similar injustices. Together, they formed networks of support, amplifying each other's voices and pushing for legislative changes at the state and national levels. Though progress was slow, Michael remained steadfast in his belief that change was possible, one step at a time. Looking back, the events of that fateful evening seemed almost surreal. What started as a routine drive home had spiraled into a nightmare that exposed the cracks in a broken system. But it had also ignited a movement, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could break through. And for Michael Carter, that light came not just from his own courage, but from the collective voice of a community demanding justice. In the months following his release, Michael Carter found himself navigating a world that felt both familiar and foreign. The small town he once called home had transformed in ways he never imagined. Streets that were once quiet now buzzed with activity as community members organized marches, workshops, and discussions about systemic racism and police reform. Posters advocating justice and equality adorned storefronts and lampposts, a testament to the collective determination to create change. Yet as much as Michael appreciated the newfound energy, he couldn't shake the lingering shadows of his ordeal. The emotional scars ran deep. Nights were the hardest. Michael would lie awake, replaying the arrest over and over in his mind, the harsh voices of the officers, the cold metal of the handcuffs, the suffocating feeling of helplessness. He often woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as if reliving the moment all over again. Sarah noticed these struggles and gently encouraged him to seek professional help. At first, Michael resisted. He didn't want to appear weak or burden others with his pain. But eventually he agreed to attend therapy sessions, realizing that healing was not something he could do alone. Therapy became a lifeline for Michael. Each session peeled back layers of trauma, allowing him to confront feelings of anger, fear, and betrayal. His therapist reminded him that it was okay to feel broken after what he'd endured. "You survived something no one should ever have to face," she told him during one particularly raw session. "That makes you strong, not weak." Slowly but surely, Michael began to rebuild his sense of self-worth. He learned coping mechanisms to manage anxiety and techniques to ground himself when memories threatened to overwhelm him. While Michael focused on his recovery, James Carter remained a constant source of support. Their bond, already strong, grew, even deeper through the shared experience. James visited frequently, checking in not just as a brother but as someone who understood the weight of responsibility. He listened without judgment, offering advice when needed and simply being present when words failed. For Michael, having James by his side meant everything. It reminded him that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. Sarah, too, played an indispensable role in Michael's healing journey. She stood by him through every step, balancing her own emotions while ensuring he felt loved and supported. Together, they worked to restore a sense of normalcy in their lives. Family dinners, weekend walks, and quiet evenings watching movies became sacred rituals, moments of joy amidst the chaos. Though the road ahead was uncertain, their love for each other served as a foundation to weather any storm. As Michael healed, so did the town. The scandal had forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about their community. Conversations that were once avoided were now front and center. Schools introduced diversity training programs, teaching students about empathy, inclusion, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Local businesses partnered with advocacy groups to host events promoting unity and understanding. Even the police department, under federal oversight, underwent significant changes. Officers attended mandatory training sessions on cultural sensitivity and accountability, while new policies ensured greater transparency in investigations. Despite these efforts, skepticism lingered. Some residents questioned whether the reforms were genuine or merely superficial attempts to appease critics. Trust, once shattered, took time to rebuild. But progress, however slow, was undeniable. Community advisory boards gave citizens a voice in shaping law enforcement practices, fostering collaboration rather than conflict. Regular town hall meetings provided platforms for open dialogue, allowing grievances to be aired and addressed constructively. For Michael, witnessing these changes inspired a renewed sense of purpose. Though he initially preferred staying out of the spotlight, he soon realized his story had the power to ignite meaningful conversations. Encouraged by James and Sarah, he began speaking publicly about his experience. His first speech was nerve-wracking. Standing before a packed auditorium, he felt exposed, vulnerable, but as he recounted the details of his wrongful arrest and the subsequent fight for justice, he saw heads nodding in agreement and eyes welling with tears. By the end, the audience erupted into applause, many rushing to thank him for sharing his truth. Word of Michael's advocacy spread quickly. Invitations poured in from neighboring towns and cities, eager to hear his perspective. He traveled extensively, meeting individuals who had faced similar injustices. Their stories mirrored his own: wrongful arrests, racial profiling, abuse of power, but also highlighted unique challenges within different communities. Through these interactions, Michael formed networks of support, connecting people who might otherwise have felt isolated in their struggles. Together, they brainstormed strategies for amplifying their voices and pushing for legislative reforms at higher levels. One of Michael's most impactful initiatives was organizing a national summit on police accountability. With James's backing, he brought together activists, lawmakers, academics, and survivors of police misconduct to discuss actionable solutions. Panels explored topics ranging from body cameras and independent oversight boards to mental health resources for officers and marginalized communities alike. Attendees left the summit armed with knowledge, tools, and renewed hope for creating lasting change. Back in his hometown, Michael continued championing local causes. He collaborated with schools to develop anti-bias curriculums, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. He mentored young people, encouraging them to speak out against injustice and pursue careers in fields where they could make a difference. His garage became more than just a place to fix cars. It evolved into a hub for community engagement, hosting workshops and fundraisers for various social justice initiatives. Though life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, reminders of the past occasionally surfaced. One day, while walking downtown, Michael crossed paths with one of the officers involved in his arrest. The man, now stripped of his badge and facing trial, looked visibly shaken. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Instead of hatred or bitterness, Michael felt pity. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability and preventing others from enduring the same pain. Without saying a word, he turned and walked away, leaving the officer to grapple with his conscience. As years passed, the town continued evolving. New leadership replaced old guardrails, ushering in an era of transparency and fairness. Incidents of misconduct plummeted thanks to stricter regulations and increased public scrutiny. Citizens felt empowered to report abuses, knowing their voices would be heard. While challenges remained, the spirit of resilience prevailed. Reflecting on his journey, Michael marveled at how far they'd come. From a routine traffic stop gone horribly wrong to a movement redefining justice, his story had become a catalyst for transformation. It taught him that even in the darkest moments, courage and unity could spark light. And though scars remained, they served as reminders of battles fought and won together. Through it all, Michael held on to one truth. Justice wasn't just a destination, it was a journey requiring vigilance, compassion, and unwavering determination. As long as there were people willing to stand up and demand better, hope would always prevail. Years had passed since the night Michael Carter was wrongfully arrested, but the echoes of that fateful evening continued to reverberate through the town and beyond. What began as a personal tragedy had blossomed into a nationwide movement, sparking conversations about accountability, systemic racism, and the need for reform in law enforcement. The changes weren't instantaneous, nor were they perfect, but like small ripples expanding across a pond, the impact of Michael's story reached farther than anyone could have imagined. The police department, once synonymous with corruption and prejudice, underwent a remarkable transformation. Under federal oversight, it became a model for transparency and community engagement. Officers now wore body cameras at all times, their actions subject to review by independent civilian boards. Training programs emphasized empathy, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity, ensuring that new recruits understood the weight of their responsibilities. Community policing initiatives brought officers closer to the people they served, fostering trust where there had once been fear and resentment. For many residents, this shift felt like a breath of fresh air, a chance to rebuild relationships on a foundation of mutual respect. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within the hearts and minds of the townspeople themselves. Conversations that had once been avoided about race, privilege, and inequality were now commonplace. Schools incorporated lessons on civil rights history and social justice into their curriculums, teaching students to recognize injustice and stand against it. Local businesses partnered with advocacy groups to host events promoting unity, from art exhibits celebrating diversity to workshops addressing unconscious bias. Even casual interactions between neighbors carried a newfound awareness, as if everyone was collectively striving to create a better future. For Michael, life settled into a rhythm of purpose and fulfillment. Though he still worked as a mechanic, his days were filled with more than just fixing cars. His garage became a gathering place for activists, educators, and concerned citizens eager to discuss ways to improve their community. On weekends, he hosted free repair clinics for low-income families, combining his passion for mechanics with his commitment to giving back. It wasn't unusual to see children playing outside while their parents learned about voter registration, drives, or attended seminars on grassroots organizing. In its own humble way, Michael's garage had become a cornerstone of hope and progress. James Carter also found himself reflecting on how much had changed, not just in the town, but within himself. As FBI director, he had always believed in the power of institutions to uphold justice. Yet witnessing his brother's ordeal taught him that true change often begins at the individual level. He made it a point to visit the town regularly, not as a high-ranking official but as someone deeply invested in its well-being. During one such visit, he joined Michael at the garage, helping hand out flyers for an upcoming town hall meeting. As they worked side by side, James couldn't help but smile. "You've come a long way," he said, clapping Michael on the shoulder, "and you've taken everyone along with you." Michael chuckled, though there was no mistaking the pride in his voice. "It wasn't me alone," he replied. "We did this together. You, Sarah, the community. Everyone played a part." It was true. The journey toward healing and justice had been a collective effort, fueled by countless acts of courage and compassion. From the protesters who braved the cold to demand accountability to the teachers who educated their students about fairness and equality, every contribution mattered. Sarah, too, had grown immensely during this time. Once content to stay in the background, she emerged as a vocal advocate for victims of police misconduct. Alongside Michael, she co-founded an organization dedicated to providing legal aid and emotional support to those affected by similar injustices. Their work took them across the country, connecting with families who had endured unimaginable hardships. Through these experiences, Sarah discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. "If I can help even one person feel less alone," she often said, "then it's worth it." As for the officers implicated in Michael's arrest, their fates served as stark reminders of the consequences of abuse of power. Several were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their careers irreparably tarnished. Others, though spared incarceration, faced lifelong bans from law enforcement and public service. Some attempted to rebuild their lives quietly, haunted by the knowledge of what they had done. One former officer, unable to cope with the guilt, wrote a letter of apology to Michael, acknowledging the harm he had caused. While Michael chose not to respond directly, he shared the letter publicly, using it as a teaching moment about redemption and accountability. Beyond the borders of the small town, Michael's story inspired broader reforms. Lawmakers cited his case when drafting legislation aimed at increasing police accountability and reducing racial profiling. Civil rights organizations adopted his advocacy methods, hosting summits and workshops modeled after the ones he'd organized. Even Hollywood took notice, producing a documentary about his ordeal and subsequent fight for justice. The film premiered to critical acclaim, shining a spotlight on issues that remained relevant years later. Despite the accolades and recognition, Michael remained grounded in his mission. Fame wasn't what drove him. Making a difference was. He continued traveling, speaking at rallies, and mentoring young activists eager to carry the torch. Each interaction reminded him why the struggle was worth it. Whether it was a teenager, sharing her dream of becoming a lawyer, or an elderly woman thanking him for giving her hope, these moments reaffirmed his belief in humanity's capacity for good. One particularly poignant occasion came during a national conference on criminal justice reform. After delivering a keynote speech, Michael was approached by a man who introduced himself as the father of a boy killed during a wrongful police shooting. Tears streamed down the man's face as he hugged Michael tightly. "Your story gave me the strength to keep fighting," he said. "Thank you for showing us that we're not powerless." Michael embraced him, feeling both heartbroken and humbled. If his pain could ease someone else's burden, then every trial had been worthwhile. Back home, the town celebrated its progress annually with a festival called Unity Day. Streets overflowed with music, food, and laughter as people from all walks of life gathered to honor the strides they'd made together. Children painted murals depicting themes of peace and equality, while elders shared stories of resilience and perseverance. At the center of it all stood Michael, surrounded by friends, family, and admirers. Though he preferred staying behind the scenes, he accepted the role of honorary guest, knowing it symbolized something greater than himself. On one such Unity Day, James delivered a speech that captured the essence of their journey. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he told the crowd. "It requires patience, persistence, and above all, unity. Today, we celebrate not just what we've achieved, but the promise of what lies ahead. Let us continue building bridges, breaking barriers, and proving that justice is possible for everyone." As fireworks lit up the night sky, Michael looked around at the sea of smiling faces. He thought about how far they'd come, from a single act of injustice to a collective movement for change. There would always be challenges, setbacks, and battles yet to fight. But standing here, surrounded by love and determination, he felt certain of one thing: they were on the right path. Years later, historians would write about the small town that dared to confront its demons and emerged stronger. Because of it, they would highlight Michael Carter's courage, James Carter's leadership, and the unwavering spirit of a community united in pursuit of justice. And though the scars of the past would never fully fade, they would serve as testaments to the power of resilience, reminding future generations that even in the darkest moments, light could prevail, if only they had the courage to seek it.